Moving on from the small House Rotunda, we find ourselves in the old chambers of the House of Representatives, now called National Statuary Hall. When the House moved into the Capitol in November of 1800, they actually met downstairs on the opposite side of the Rotunda. That side, called the Senate side, was the first part of the Capitol building to be completed, and at that time the House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court all met in the Senate wing of the Capitol. Then, in 1807, the second wing, the House wing, was completed, and the House moved here. Those two separate wings were originally connected only by a wooden walkway until they were permanently joined together by the Capitol Rotunda in 1824. After moving here in 1807, the House remained in this room until 1857, when it moved into its current chambers. By the way, notice that here in the current House chambers, prominently displayed above the Speaker's rostrum is this declaration, "In God we trust." Notice, too, that around the top of the wall are images of great lawgivers from across the centuries, including Hammurabi, Justinian, Gregory, Grotius, Blackstone, and 18 others. In the middle, at the back, is Moses, symbolically looking down on the proceedings of the House. Significantly, Moses, the lawgiver of the Bible, is the only lawgiver who is honored with a full-face view. All the others only have a side profile.
You're talking about explaining the actual pictures in the U.S. Capitol.
In the U.S. Capitol, commissioned by the U.S. Congress so that we would know our own history, which we don't.
And now they have the audacity to talk about some kind of made-up term, separation of church and state, when that is our heritage. That's who we are.
That's who we are. And what separation of church and state has done is separate us from our heritage. Because of separation of church and state, we can't teach religious things in the textbooks. We can't teach about the Pilgrims or about the first Thanksgiving. We can't teach about the Great Awakening. We can't teach about the Father Abraham speech that John Adams and Ben Franklin said is what caused America to come together for independence.
Wow.
We can't talk about those things. So separation of church and state, people think it's a good idea. It has been the way that they have secularized our entire heritage and history. But if you walk in the U.S. Capitol, you're surrounded with it. You see it everywhere. I mean, you walk in and there's Mother Joseph, huge statue, kneeling in prayer with a cross in front of her. There's Junipero Serra, statue of him holding a cross high in the air. There's Marcus Whitman, huge statue, mega Bible under his arm. And so he's got this huge... It's all over the Capitol, and we don't know that.
For our nation's godly history in the American Heritage Series. America, this is your heritage.
You know, the Capitol's not the only place that's loaded up with religious expressions. I love if you walk across the street into the U.S. Supreme Court building. The Supreme Court has worked really diligently to secularize so much of what goes on there. And I do a lot of tours of Washington, D.C., tours of the Capitol building, etc. And the one place I really like least taking a tour or going on tour is the Supreme Court, because they're so determined to rewrite history to match what their rulings are, that if you walk into the Supreme Court chamber up over the top of the court and the friezes along the top, there's Moses up there holding the Ten Commandments. Now, Moses, long flowing robe, big pointed beard, he's got the two tablets there. They're numbered 1 through 5 and 6 through 10. They're numbered in Hebrew. The guy who carved that frieze, they have his records on the website for the Supreme Court. He says it's Moses holding the Ten Commandments. But now the court's been saying, oh, Ten Commandments? Can't do that. So what do they say on the tours of the U.S. Supreme Court now? You look up there and say, oh, is that Moses holding the Ten Commandments? They say, no, that's Moses holding the Bill of Rights.
Oh.
You go, the Bill of Rights?
Oh, you're kidding.
But it's in Hebrew. No, it's the Bill of Rights. I thought the Bill of Rights was 4,000 years after Moses. No, it's the Bill of... They're adamant that it is not Moses holding the Ten Commandments. It's Moses holding the Bill of Rights. And you'll hear that regularly on tours. And I continue to check periodically, and they still say, oh, it's Moses holding the Bill of Rights.
Wow.
Well, don't just stop there. Look over to the right side, because there's a lattice work that separates the Supreme Court bar from the Supreme Court bench itself. And that lattice work, if you're a member of the Supreme Court bar, if you're an attorney, you can sit over there and listen to the cases being argued at the court. And it's kind of an alcove off the side, like the old churches used to have a choir alcove off the side. And there's this golden lattice work, this crosshatch that they have, that separates the attorneys from the proceedings. Well, if you decide you want to go over there and look real closely at the lattice work. Everywhere the lattice work crosses is a little medallion. It's a medallion of the Ten Commandments. Over 40 copies of the Ten Commandments on that lattice work to separate the Supreme Court bar from the court. Oh no, we don't have the Ten Commandments in public buildings. Well, if you really want to get ambitious, before you leave the courtroom, as you turn around and you start walking out the aisle to go to the back, just kind of close the doors on the back chamber. And when you do, the U.S. Justices of the Supreme Court are looking at the copy of the Ten Commandments engraved on the back of the doors of the Supreme Court chamber.
Time out. Are you kidding me? You're not kidding me, right? You're not kidding. Okay, and
there's nearly 50 depictions of the Ten Commandments in the U.S. Supreme Court building, the building that says, oh, you can't have the Ten Commandments in the court building.
Okay, the same Ten Commandments that recently was ruled be taken out of a public setting, out of the courtroom.
Yeah.
So they didn't rip off the doors off, and they didn't modify the U.S. Supreme Court.
Well, what they do is they now leave the doors open all the time, so you can't see what's on the back of them. And they tell you that the Ten Commandments you can see is actually the Bill of Rights, and they don't show you the lattice work over on the side or the other copies throughout the building. Now, if you want to go out of that building and go over to the National Archives, which is a really cool building, that's where they house the original Constitution, the original Declaration.
How many copies are there?
Of the original copies, I mean, there is that big one. And then they made copies to give to the 13 states. So each of the states had a copy that they got to reference.
Hand-signed, original.
Everything was done. Jackson was the secretary who did the calligraphy work, who pinned it all out. So you've got the original one there that's signed by everybody, and then you've got the others that they did for the states. Okay. So the original one at the Constitutional Convention, there's just one of those. And that's the one they've got there. So they display that, and you walk in, and the National Archives is such a cool building. It's all the official records of the government. Well, you throw open these big bronze doors. They've got to be 10, 12 feet high. I mean, they're massive, they're thick. You throw it open, you walk in, and right in front of you on the far wall, you can see the Declaration. You can see the Constitution. You're standing there in awe. And if you'll take just a moment and look down at your feet, you'll find that you're standing right on the Ten Commandments. Embedded in the floor of the National Archives, there's the Ten Commandments right in the floor. So you push open these big bronze doors, you walk in, and you go, wow. And if you just say, oh, there's the Ten Commandments, you're standing right on the Ten Commandments, part of the National Archives.
Okay, so basically you have to be an idiot to believe this stuff.
Well, what you have to do is you have to not know that it's there. I mean, this is public stuff. It's all over, but who knows it? People go to Washington, D.C. People, between 2 and 5 million visitors a year visit the U.S. Capitol. They just don't notice this stuff because they've been told it's a secular building, so they're not looking for it. The surrender of Yorktown occurred in 1781. This Bible was printed in 1782. And the peace treaty with Great Britain was officially signed the next year in 1783. Interestingly, even that peace treaty, negotiated and signed by John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and John Jay, reflects the strong religious sentiments of our founding fathers. Notice the opening declaration. It begins, "In the name of the most holy and undivided Trinity. Amen." You can still see a copy of the original treaty at the John Quincy Adams State Drawing Room in the U.S. State Department here in Washington. When word of the signed peace treaty reached America, George Washington officially resigned as Commander-in-Chief. In this final picture here in the rotunda, George Washington is informing his military staff and the leaders of Congress of his resignation. In addition to these 8 pictures, which are the centerpiece of attention here in the rotunda, you'll also see several statues of America's heroes and statesmen lining the walls. Each state is allowed to display 2 statues of individuals from their own state. In addition to these 100 statues, there are 5 to 10 other statues here, depending on various displays at any given time. So, if an individual is displayed here, it is indeed a great honor. Very few individuals from across America's long history have ever been accorded this distinction. These statues appear primarily in 4 rooms. Here in the rotunda, but also in the East Central Hall, the Hall of Columns, and National Statuary Hall. This statue, here in the rotunda, is of our 20th President, James A. Garfield. I hold here in my hand a letter from James A. Garfield. In it, he describes how that he had just finished preaching a revival where he personally preached the gospel 19 times, with 34 individuals coming to Christ and 31 of them being baptized. Somehow today we don't typically associate such activities with our presidents, yet this was a part of the life of James A. Garfield, the 20th President of the United States and a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ.